Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, and we're here with Coffee with a Farmer with my very good friend and longtime colleague, Jim Beecher. And we'll be talking with him in a bit. He is from Fresno, and his farm, Farming D, is headquartered in the booming metropolis of West Point.
5 points.
Look it up. 5 points, sorry. West Side, 5 points. I was almost there. And so this morning, just like we normally do, I'm going to have folks introduce themselves from around the state. And today's question that we're going to start with, a little opening circle, is what is your favorite sports team? And this doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be all the way professional. Whatever you is your favorite team, and kind of what is a sports team that you're missing a lot right now? And I'm going to start. Mary Kimball, Executive Director, Center for Land-Based Learning in Winters. And I have lots of favorite sports teams. And I just was realizing this last night, how much I was missing listening to or watching my San Francisco Giants right now. It is a big part of my life. It's been a part of my life since I was 9. When I started coming home from school and listening on the radio with my dad to KNBR 68. So it's a little strange to not have the Giants to listen to. So that's who I'm missing the most. So we'll go to you, Dana.
Good morning. I'm Dana Baker, the Tehama County Farms Leadership Coordinator, and I'm in Red Bluff. Honestly, I'm not a big sports fan. We're not huge sports fans, but I will have to say the most I'm missing is my sports for my little ones. My son, who is a U10er, should be playing soccer right now, and it's really kind of disappointing. I'm missing getting to be at the, fields a couple nights a week for practice, as well as having those Saturdays spent at the games. So, everybody will be anxious for these, to get back in motion. So.
Absolutely. Very good. Okay. Let's see. Is Joseph there? No, I don't see Joseph. Oh, that's right. He's on another call this morning with Sierra Pacific Industries. Let's see. So then we'll go to Katie.
Good morning. Katie Wortman, the Central Valley Farms Coordinator here in Fresno. I also have been, I was raised in everything sports, so 49ers, which was a great big year, but definitely the Giants, San Francisco Giants, and recently kind of revisited Fresno State baseball. And so that just being able to watch on TV, kind of background noise, definitely missing sports. And, also same with Dana, my daughter was supposed to start T-ball. And so that's kind of on the back burner. So hopefully next year we'll be able to circle around and do that.
Very good. Okay, Romy.
Good morning. My name is Romy Wattenbarger. I'm the Kern County Farms Coordinator here in Bakersfield. And I would say mine right now is being able to go to our CrossFit gym. That was a huge part of my life, going every morning and getting my routine, and it's kind of thrown me off. So that would be my favorite. But I watch sports on TV, football and NASCAR, so definitely missing the background.
NASCAR, all right. That's great. Okay, and Letty.
Good morning. My name's Letty Hernandez. I run the program in Santa Cruz and Monterey County. I'm really not a sports person, but if I had to choose, football would probably be a big one. So I'm not missing much right now. And my team of choice is the Broncos.
Ah, the Broncos. Okay, well, very good. Well, thanks, you guys. That was fun, a little roundup. And now we'll go to Jim Beecher. Jim and I were members of the California Ag Leadership Program, Class 32. Almost 20 years ago. And you've also heard from several of our other classmates in the last week, and that was Blake Carlson and Deanna Van Clavern, and this Friday is Frank Hilliker. So Jim, you are the big number 3 from our class. Please don't disappoint. So I'm just kidding. Jim's a great friend, and over the years has been a great mentor to me in agriculture in general. And so it'd be great to hear from you. about your story about how you got into agriculture.
Okay. First off, Giants fans. I'm a Dodger fan. All right.
See, I knew that was gonna come, so.
I was born and raised in LA. And so I never knew we grew cotton in California until I met my wife.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm not from an agricultural background. I'm from an engineering, commercial construction background. I studied finance in college and then was a project engineer for a contractor before I met Julie and married into agriculture. So I'm a little bit different than a lot of farm leaders, I guess, in the Central Valley. That a lot of the guys are my like compatriots, or my contemporaries, kind of were born and raised in agriculture. And so I'm a little bit different. Okay.
You are more than a little bit different.
But I've been involved with the management of Farming D since 1994. We farm 9,500 acres in western Fresno County in 5 Points. Our crops change annually, of course, but our focus is on processing tomatoes. We're partners in a tomato cannery in Huron called Los Gatos Tomato Products. So if you've had Heinz ketchup, you've eaten tomatoes that my farm has produced. And so processing tomatoes is by acreage the #1 crop we grow year in, year out. We also have almonds, and we're developing pistachios, and we have some wine grapes. And when we have the water, we'll grow some cotton as a rotation. We have some lettuce contracts and things like that, but pretty much we're tomato growers.
Right. Well, that's perfect, because I really wanted to talk to you today about the tomato side of your world, tomato processing side. So what's going on right now out in the farm fields? I know you might not necessarily be out there. You've got other folks leading that, but what's going on? What's like, if you were to drive into 5 Points right now in any of your fields, what would be happening?
We'd be transplanting tomatoes, and we'll be transplanting pretty much until May. Because tomato harvest basically begins in Kern County, sometime late June, very early July.
Wow.
And it'll go to the middle of October, sometimes into November if the crop's late. And so you kind of transplant accordingly. And we'll have started transplanting in February, March, April, 3 months of harvest, 3 months of transplanting.
Right.
So
I remember years ago and growing up here in Yolo County that it was all seed, and at some point it switched over. And so what's the advantage of going from, instead of direct seeding in the way that it used to be, to transplants? Why has pretty much the entire industry switched over to transplants?
The first thing that drove to transplanting was the price of seed. So if you're direct seeding, you'll use 2 to 3 times as many seeds as you do when you transplant. And so once the cost of hybrid seed started skyrocketing, farmers started transplanting. And so there's a couple of benefits. Truly, it's seed saving drove it. And then once you start doing it, you realize there are other benefits. So one of the benefits is a guaranteed stand, right? If you transplant properly, you don't get any hard freezes or hailstorms or something like that relatively shortly after you transplant. You've got a guaranteed stand. You're going to have a crop. That's pretty important. If you put a ton of seed in the ground and you're waiting for it to germinate and it's too cold or something, your timing gets all screwed up or your uniformity gets messed up or something like that. And so that's one of the top benefits, is knowing you're going to have a stand, unless there's something crazy happening, because you watch the weather and you don't transplant right ahead of a potential hailstorm, or you don't transplant right ahead of a forecast of sub 30-degree temperatures. And so that's a benefit. Another benefit, and this is a big one to guys like me that are south of the Delta in short water districts, is that you save a couple of irrigations.
Okay.
All right. You're getting to a seedling, where your plant's like 6 inches high without having to do any irrigations on your own farm. They're being done in the greenhouses. So that's always been a kind of a icing on the cake thing for farmers and trying to save as many irrigations as possible.
And I always remember, the other thing I remember is the hoeing crews, right? So the labor needs, right, to go out there, like you said, you're seeding at 2 to 3 times the rate, and then you'd have to send the crews out to hoe so that you get the right spacing. So I would assume that also, well, I don't know if it ends up being a savings in cost, but it certainly is a savings in labor, I would expect.
Yeah, well, you kind of trade costs with, you save on seed with transplanting, but your planting costs are higher because you have up to 6 workers on the transplanter feeding the seedlings into the transplanting arms or the round tables. And then you have 3 or 4 guys following the transplanter, and the guy driving the tractor, and the guy driving a forklift, moving seedlings from the trailer to the transplanter, and things like that. So you have a lot more people while you're transplanting, instead of like 2 guys filling seed into hoppers and a guy driving the tractor pulling the seed, the planter. But you're right, you don't have to thin. And again, you have a uniformity that is just hard to duplicate by direct seeding.
Well, the other thing that when you brought up the irrigation piece, that I remember talking with you about, that you guys were real leaders in your region in going to buried drip irrigation. And again, it'd be interesting to hear from you, because I know you've been a part of the processing tomato world for a long time, and at the leadership level, even at the international world scale. What kind of changes have we seen in the irrigation side, and I don't know if you can guesstimate how many acres even in California are now utilizing buried drip? And again, what is the benefits of buried drip?
Okay, so this is another instance where you start doing something for one reason, and then you realize that you're really benefiting in different ways. We started using subsurface drip, like 24 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, and originally subsurface drip was frowned upon in the processed tomato space because farmers really didn't know how to use it. And they were increasing their yields by blowing up their crop with water. And when you process tomatoes, basically you're removing skin and seed and water from the tomato. And so the more water in your tomato, the lower your solids.
Right.
The more tomatoes the cannery has to buy per pound of paste that they're making, or pound of diced or whatever. And so canneries asked growers not to use drip. And so we have been blessed with having a UC research station located across the street from our farm. And so Don May led the charge, and Blaine Hansen were 2 famous UC researchers from Davis that started working with us in developing irrigation regimens that maintained solids in the tomato crop with drip. And that's the use of deficit irrigation at the end of the crop cycle, where you're giving the plants less water than they'd like. And so they kind of stress, and they shoot the roots, and they go for whatever moisture they can find in the ground, but you're kind of slowly drying or kind of starving the plant a little bit for water the last 30 days before harvest. And that's been very effective for maintaining quality. The other reason why we started using subsurface drip was that we are in an area that is famous for shallow groundwater.
Right.
And that gets into things that weren't finished when they stopped building the drain for the Central Valley project. And we could talk about that for ages, but we used to.
Yeah. I said a whole nother talk.
Yeah,
Yes.
that would take a week, right? Yeah, that'd be a Netflix series. Anyhow, but one of the byproducts of using drip irrigation on tomatoes is that when you conventionally irrigate tomatoes, a tomato plant will send a taproot down like 3.5 feet straight down, a big thick root, to tap into the moisture profile that's below the bed. Okay, with drip, you're irrigating the crop from the inside out. And so tomato plants don't develop a taproot when you're using drip. All right, and so those taproots used to get into the shallow groundwater on our ranch. And shallow groundwater is groundwater that's come from below the surface of the soil towards the top of the surface of the soil when it puddles, right? And that brings up salt and all sorts of bad stuff into the root zone. And we were using drip as a way to maybe prevent that taproot from going down into that groundwater and killing itself. Okay, another reason a lot of people start using drip was water savings. That's a little bit misleading. In my experience, we have not really used a lot less water. Now, a little bit less still is important, and we do use a little bit less. But in reality, you're using less water in a different way. It's not less water per acre, it's less water per ton. In terms of when you use drip irrigation, you increase your production 20 to 30%.
Wow.
Maybe more than conventional irrigation. So for every ton of tomatoes we grow today, we're using 20 to 30% less water per ton, but
right.
about the same amount of water in total.
Right.
Get it?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so
no, that's good.
that's
I
a huge
actually
deal.
didn't realize. I knew you had, obviously increased tonnage, considerable yields increase with the subsurface drip, but I didn't realize that you were using a lot less. The water use was really not that much of a difference.
Exactly. And so, right. And so you're asking how many people use drip irrigation in California. I'm unaware of anybody not.
Okay. So it's really switched over.
Pretty much. I would say if it's got to be north of 85–90% of the acreage. Wow. I know Cannon, he's done some flood irrigation and stuff in his area, and that's not a water waste. It's just a different way to irrigate. But the other benefits of drip irrigation in tomatoes is you don't have phytophthora and things like that, and diseases that are kind of go along with water puddling in a field and it's 100 degrees outside and whatnot. You want to keep your beds dry, and the way to do that much easier than being real good furrow irrigator is drip.
which is always the thing before, right? That how good your irrigator was is usually how
flat your fields are, how level your fields used to be, and how consistent the fall of your fields were. And what type of soil you were farming. Some fields would just suck the water up. You couldn't get it through the bed. You couldn't get it to the end of the furrow.
That's right.
Other fields, you couldn't get it to go into the furrow. It would just run out to, that's solved a little bit with subsurface drip.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the other side of tomato processing, production. We've been talking about a little bit, but the other side of this, which is sales and marketing. And we heard yesterday from Cannon, Michael, and Bulls Farming that there has been some changes in contracts because of the reduction in, or that there's the rumor at least, because of the food service reductions due to COVID-19. And I just wanted to see what you've been hearing, what kinds of things. And I know you have your own tomato processing plant, so that might be a little different. You have your own, you're literally contracting with yourself, which I think obviously is a pretty good benefit to having your own processing facility. But what are you hearing from some of the, like the Heinz's and others that you work with around the country and around the world?
Well, it's funny. We have been growing pretty exclusively for our own cannery for years, and this year, another processor had been approaching us over time, and we finally buckled and said, "Okay, we'll grow 3 fields for you." And this processor is specifically more of a whole peel food service supplying company, where our cannery pretty much makes only one thing, and that's tomato paste. And the tomato paste we make is pretty much ketchup paste. We're very good at ketchup paste. Our biggest customer is Heinz. Our second biggest customer is Red Gold. It's a company in the Midwest. It's like the Hunts of the Midwest and East. And they're retail, you know, pretty much. Although Heinz has food service, you know, for restaurants. Food service is the restaurant kind of supply chain. Retail is the supply chain we all participate in when we buy food and what we cook at home. And so we were called 2 weeks ago by this cannery, and they canceled a third of our contract. And so out of the 3 fields that we had prepared, or we had transplanted the first field already, we were transplanting the second field, and they sent us a letter canceling the third field. That seed was already dropped in the greenhouse. We'll have a discussion with them over how that gets taken care of. And it's pretty much unprecedented in my personal experience to have a cannery cut a field this late. Lots of times you'll get your schedules or your intentions from your canner in November. You kind of agree to that. You'll order seed by January. It needs to be to the greenhouse, and they start dropping seed in January for, you know, the 6 weeks later in early March when you start transplanting, or late February. Because typically seed from going dropped in the greenhouse to seedlings ready to be transplanted is 6 weeks, give or take. And so, and so the food service supply chain has ground to a screeching halt, while the retail supply chain has seen some hoarding. You can go to like some grocery stores, at least a couple weeks ago, maybe not now because everybody's kind of finished with the hoarding.
Stocked up now,
is that, you know, you can find tomato sauce or pasta sauce or something that's self-storable.
A lot of the, you go into the canned food aisles and it was like shockingly bare.
Right. And so, and now we're trying to figure out how that affects maybe what's needed by those guys this summer. Because I don't necessarily think people are eating more or less during the stay-at-home, you know, shelter-in-place stuff. They're just kind of collecting it much differently.
Right. Well, and like you said, it's a shift in consumption. So instead of going out to a restaurant, right, for multiple meals a week, maybe, you know, to some families, lots of meals a week, they're eating at home for the most part. So the shift, like you said, is more to the retail side, but not necessarily, they're not eating more. They're just eating from different places. Yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, so like we're moving a lot of paste, right? But I can see in a couple months where, you know, the records we're setting in March for shipments will turn into records for not shipping in July.
Right.
You know, it's to be determined, right? But the one thing we do know is that the supply chains have been upset. How it shakes out, when it ever, what the new normal becomes.
Right.
Because I don't know if anything's ever going to be the way it was.
So what about on the
Time will
world, like the world side, Jim, because you were, leader and still are, I believe, the World Processing Tomato Council. So what are other countries, what's happening in other countries in this? I mean, obviously in some, it's mostly tomatoes, I'm assuming, are all grown in Mediterranean climates around the world, and that's different times of year, depending if you're Southern Hemisphere or Northern Hemisphere. But what is going on in some of the other, like Italy or Spain?
Well, I know. I mean, it's kind of like California is the 400-pound gorilla globally. Globally, I think we're producing like 36 million metric tons. When you do the conversion, California is about 12 of that, 11 and a half to 12 of that right now. So we're a third of the globe.
Right.
Number 2 is China.
China. Oh,
And
okay.
from
Xinjiang.
Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia. So like kind of boondocks China, not Wuhan, right? So far northwest China, in the northern part of China, in Inner Mongolia, they have some tomato stuff. They've been struggling for years, that industry, because the Chinese just don't eat a lot of tomato sauce. The big customers Chinese companies have are, believe it or not, well, there's Russian exports, there's domestic consumption, and that's pretty much Pizza Hut and KFC and McDonald's and things like that in China. And then actually one of their bigger customers, Italy. And Italy takes Chinese paste, calls it Italian sauce, and sells it into North Africa. Okay, it's weird. And and so
and then here we are in this country. Here we are thinking we should be buying Italian tomato sauce.
Yeah, well, when you're buying Italian tomato sauce in California, it's not being made with Chinese paste. But it's kind of funny. And so Italy is the third biggest supplier globally. And Spain's the fourth.
Okay.
I've emailed, they don't know what's going to happen. First of all, the economics of the processing tomato industry have been tough over the last 2 to 3, 4 years. Most commodities have been tough. If they're not called almonds and pistachios, most everything we've been producing over the last few seasons has not been breaking financial records, right? And so everybody's production was going to be lower this year. And now this. And at least half of the Italian crop comes from northern Italy. Comes from the epicenter of the COVID-19 epidemic in Italy. And my guess is those farmers have their plates full. And I have not spoken to my friends. I've sent some emails that haven't been responded with anything but like auto responses from the people that make like Pomi and Casalacqua, and the companies in Italy. They're friends of mine. And so I'm not really quite sure what's happening with the Italian industry or the Spanish industry. I just got a text from a Spanish friend of mine today asking how we were doing. Sounds like his family's doing well. He's more of a broker. He's not a producer. And so, but now is the time when those markets are transplanting in earnest. Their harvest starts a little bit later than California's. And I hope to get updated soon, but all I know is there's going to be a little bit of chaos and nobody really knows what kind of market's going to be at the end of the summer. Now, most processed stuff is done annually. So we've been negotiating with the processors as growers. We don't have a price set for 2020. You know, we were expecting the price to go up from last year. With the pandemic, I can see that the processors, and I'm wearing 2 hats, right?
Yes.
Could use that to argue for a lower price. We'll see.
Yes.
But we like things that are kind of consistent. We like things that are expected.
That's right.
But we're farmers. We are used to dealing with the unexpected. And so we'll see how we get through this. I expect we will, but there'll be some pain.
Yeah. So Katie,
And I think there's going to be a lot of pain in
a
Europe.
lot of pain. And I do have one more question on that, but I think Katie, did you have a question, Katie?
I just kind of was comparing it to when you said that your contracts were pulled out, comparing it to like the olive industry around last year when all of a sudden
Yeah.
they just kind of pulled their contracts and those farmers didn't have anywhere to go. And then the same thing kind of with the dairy industry where the need for the product is in the home and it's at a smaller rate in like packaging, and the restaurants don't need it, so they're not doing the big packaging and it kind of just the different packaging. Just kind of to put it in students' perspective on, it's kind of the same thing and we're just kind of unknown. But I think at the same time, the tomato industry can kind of the product can be canned and used at a different time. Can you kind of use that as like, well, we're going to eventually need this, or can you kind of use that in your rebuttal with your contracts and when they come back and you guys start negotiating price wise?
To a certain extent, we have that flexibility. Most customers want paste that is less than 18 months old.
That's what I was going to say. It's probably still a freshness issue. Yes.
Yeah. Once they remanufacture it aseptically and put it into a can or a jar or a tube, it'll last even longer. But I think as tomato paste ages, it changes a bit, even though it's aseptic, even though it's storable, even outside. And you'll talk to guys that are running the catch-up line for Heinz, and they'll say it processes differently once it gets a certain age. And so there is more flexibility for sure than milk. Fresh milk for sure. And don't cry for me, Argentina, the dairy guys are gonna just, I can't imagine a supply chain that's gonna be upside down more than that one. I have some dairyman friends and it's just, ugh. So anyhow, we have a little bit of that flexibility. And then some guys, they'll buy whatever is available. They don't care. They'll buy it. They're price buyers. They'll buy the cheapest paste. I mean, I know that we have competitors that just one competitor that just decided to close its processing, Olam, has been selling 4-year-old paste, like really cheap. No one likes that. I mean, but what is Olam going to do? They got this paste, they haven't sold it. They got to sell it.
Absolutely. So one last question, as usual, it's always hard to stop talking to you, Jim, because you're very fun and interesting, but we'll have one last question here. So I was reading this morning, on California Ag Today that it looks like the produce industry is trying to lobby President Trump and the legislature, Congress, I should say, to put in some funding or some significant funding for these disruptions in the produce industry. I assume that tomatoes and canning, processing tomato is a part of this discussion, but I'm not sure. I wanted to see. Sounds like it's obviously folks from Salinas Valley and certainly La Malfa from up here is a part of it. Costa is a part of it. So I just wanted to see if what you know about that and this attempt to try to get some relief, shall we say, from the federal government. So what do you know about that? And
I don't know much about that effort. Okay. I hope that they include the processing tomato sector in something like that, but they're coming at it from a totally different direction, back to the point where we have this storability kind of backstop where my friend, like, Bruce Taylor and Taylor Farms, they don't have storability.
No.
They have fresh vegetables that get packaged and maybe can store for like a week to 10 days or 2 weeks, but they're a much more timely,
Right.
disaster. Our disaster takes time.
It's
slowly
it's
unfolds.
a long
right?
ache. Yeah.
Whereas the fresh market guys, their disasters happen very quickly.
Yes.
I could call Mike Monton up, and you ought to talk to Monton.
Yeah, we should talk
If you're
to
into,
Mike.
he's a good guy, and he's the head of the Tomato Growers Association for the process side. He would be involved in that. But I can't. I hope we're thrown in. I'm not familiar exactly with what they're asking for.
Well, I just saw it come up
Mhm.
today, and I guess the original CARES Act from a couple weeks ago did include quite a lot of money. I mean, it's all relative. It's in the billions, right? For specialty crops, which is good because oftentimes things never include specialty crops. But anyway, I think it's the next steps in trying to get more from there.
Yeah,
So
but that CARES thing, that's going to be another train wreck.
Yeah.
It's nice
It
of the
already
government
is.
to try to help, but I mean, the banking, we bank with Wells and Farm Credit, right? And Wells closed their website
Yep. I know.
to more applications before we could get our application in
Yeah.
for an SBA loan
Yes.
because of overwhelming demand.
Yes.
Farm Credit wasn't a
lender. Yeah.
Yeah,
They work
an
with
accredited
SBA.
lender with
Yeah.
the Small Business Administration. So they took a couple days, and now they have a third.
Yeah.
When
know.
we'll see.
We will see. Well, I think that is a fitting end to
Right.
this conversation. We will see. So we're going to be doing these conversations with a farmer and through the end of May, obviously, and we'll know a lot more at that point, I'm sure. But like you said, Jim, we're not going to know really how this all shakes out and what the new normal is for a long time. So I really appreciate you coming on today. It's been a great conversation as always. And we will be in touch, I'm sure. And thanks again for your time and all of your support. I want to also give you a huge shout out because Farming D has been a long time, probably about almost 20-year supporter of the Farms Leadership Program and for the Center for Land-Based Learning. So thank you very much. We very much appreciate it. And we'll talk very soon. Take care.
Anytime. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks for
Bye.
working for Farm
Thank
Leadership.
you.
Yep.
Yeah. Bye.
Yep.